All right, hello everyone, and welcome to our panel discussion titled Prescriptions for Change, Reforming Patents to Lower Drug Costs. And my name is Canyon Brimhall, and I'm a Senior Manager of Federal Affairs on our Tech and Innovation and Cybersecurity projects at the R Street Institute. The R Street Institute is a 501c3 nonprofit focused on research that promotes limited, effective government. I'm very happy that you're here to join us for our discussion today. We've got an excellent panel, and our panel today is going to be discussing how current patent laws contribute to high drug prices and explore innovative policy solutions to lower costs without stifling innovation. We'll discuss strategies to close loopholes that extend monopolies, promote generic competition, and ensure a fair balance between rewarding innovation and protecting public health. Our panelists today include Wayne Brow, Resident Senior Fellow, Technology and Innovation at the R Street Institute, Tahira Min, Co-founder and Chief Executive Officer, Initiative for Medicines, Access and Knowledge, and Sean Tu, Professor of Law, West Virginia University. I would like to now turn it over, if our panelists would be so kind, for introductions on their part. Wayne, maybe we'll start with you.
Yeah, thank you, everyone. Thanks for joining us. And this is one of a series of events that we've been doing on the important issue of patents and their impact on drug pricing. And I think there's a pretty broad consensus that there are some problems in this area that need to be addressed. We see behavior, and unfortunately, under existing laws, a lot of what we see out in the marketplace is actually legal, but they're just strange incentives created by the patent system that suggest that prices are being kept artificially high. The length of patents are being extended beyond what was initially suggested for every patent, and that leaves consumers and patients as the groups that suffer with higher prices in the marketplace. So before we dive into the details, I did want to sort of say that there is sort of this broader question of what roles patents play. And in the Constitution, we had this notion that they promote science and the useful arts. So this is something that's built into the Constitution, that yes, if we provide a patent, it can provide an incentive for an inventor to innovate. And we're at a point now where the Patent Office is issuing about 300,000 patents a year. So it's a very big and sort of unwieldy system that we've put in place. And it does have these characteristics that actually can harm innovation and harm the ability to others to get into a market and compete effectively. And one of the problems, I think, is because in a lot of ways, we've tried to equate patent rights with property rights, and they become somehow inviolable, and we don't want to engage in changing property rights. But patents have always been a creature of statutory law. They're positive law. They were created by Congress. They're enforced by Congress through the U.S. Patent Office. And if they're not working, just like any other regulatory structure that we put in place, if it's not working or it has problems, let's go back and fix it so it does what it really should do. So I hope we can get into some of those issues as we have this conversation today. Thanks.
Thank you, Wayne. And before I turn it over to the others, I just want to do a quick plug. We do have a Q&A section, so if you have any questions or if you come up with any throughout the panel, please throw them in there, and we'll do our best to leave some time at the end to answer those. It's always nice if we have some ready to go. So I'll turn it over to Sean now.
What you wanted me to just do a quick introduction about myself? Is that what we're doing?
Just okay. An opening statement from you, essentially. What kind of you would like to focus on over the course of this discussion?
Yeah, no, so I agree with what Wayne said. It's, the patent system is actually a great way to incentivize innovation, right? But Hatch-Waxman was introduced in 1984, and I feel like, just like the tax code, right? Companies have really learned how to abuse this or use the system in a way that it was never intended to do, right? In a way that instead of enhancing competition, has really evolved into something that prevents competition. And the best way that you can reduce drug prices is market competition. I'm a fan of patents, but I'm more of a fan of capitalism. And you can tell when people compete, prices go down. I can tell you exactly when prices go down by looking at the competition. It's like immediately you get a 30 to 50% drop in prices when we get real competition between firms. What are patents? Patents are the exact opposite of competition, right? And I understand why they're there. They're there to help compensate the brand firms for all that they do, which is, not inexpensive. They're providing a real service for innovating as well as shepherding some of these drugs through the FDA approval process, which is, again, not very cheap. But patents are a limited monopoly. And I feel like sometimes we lose the word limited from the vernacular. And at some point in time, that needs to go away. True competition needs to come down. And then we get kind of the availability of these drugs after these firms recoup their costs and, also make a handsome profit. And that handsome profit can't be for forever, is, I guess, what I would say.
Excellent. Thank you, sir. And always appreciate the pro-capitalism. I'm going to +1 for that comment and turn it over to here.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you for hosting this event and for having me join. I absolutely concur with a lot of the comments that have been made by both Dr. Brow and Sean. I mean, I come to this from somebody who's worked in the private practice throughout the world, but also for corporations that are protecting intellectual property assets. I spent 10 years as a UK solicitor doing that, protecting these intellectual property rights, including all sorts of IP rights from trademarks, copyright, patents. So I understand the business needs in terms of trying to protect these assets and the R&D costs and what have you, and getting the ROI and returns. But I think what we have now is really a system that is being driven by financialized motivations and not actually what you might call, going back to the original concept of, if you want to take the US Constitution language of progressing the arts, the sciences and the arts. I think this is not what this system is about anymore. It's become a Wall Street system where basically pharmaceutical corporations, if that's what we're talking about today, but it applies across a lot of different sectors. The patent system has become an instrument to basically meet shareholder value, short-term profits, and all under the guise of this very loose term, which I will go into a little bit, is this word innovation. I don't know what it means anymore. And I think we need to start questioning that because until we do that, I don't think we're going to get really an honest answer in this conversation. Now, I know it's one of those nebulous terms. It can mean everything and it can mean nothing. But I think it's time we start to put a qualitative, sort of meaning around the term. And when I think about the patent system, and I came through the IP system as a practicing lawyer in the early 90s, and I always remember that most people used to talk about the word inventiveness. You don't hear that so much anymore. You heard the word innovation, and anybody who knows a bit of Latin will know that basically the word innovation comes from the word innovare, which actually means to renew. And so what we're going to talk about today is patent tickets. And most of those patents are renewals of what's already invented. And one doesn't even have to know the economic theories of Schumpeter and what have you, who clearly made a distinction between invention and innovation. If anyone reads his work of business cycles, innovation is an easier way. I'm not saying it's easy, but it's an easier way to keep recycling what already exists. And that is the patent system today. So we have to ask these deeper questions of what are we talking about in terms of progressing the arts? Or is it just really economic growth for the sake of a few?
I really appreciate that. Very well said. And I also appreciate we've already got a couple of questions in our Q&A section. So thank you all for being very engaged. And I know that you're passionate about this topic because we're on at the same time as Netanyahu's speech in front of Congress. So you must really want to be here if you chose to join us. Really appreciate that. And I think this is going to be a really good conversation. So keep those questions coming. We love to see it. But I'm going to start off. I'm going to kind of bracket the initial discussion we're going to have into two buckets. The problem that we're facing today and solutions to that problem. So to start off with, let's discuss the problem so that we can better understand where we are today. And if you don't mind, I'll start with Sean. Sean, how do current patent laws and regulations enable pharmaceutical companies to extend their monopolies beyond the intended patent period? And what specific strategies do they employ?
All right, so yeah, I like this question. I think there are both direct ways and indirect ways that a drug firm can use their patents to extend their market power. So what you really want to focus on is how drug firms are able to kind of keep their prices high for longer periods of time. And what you want to look for is meaningful market entry for competition. You know, again, the whole point of patents in this field, unlike big tech, which, you know, where they get a lot of patents to cross-license. Your cell phone probably has like 250,000 patents in it, and everybody has to cross-license or nothing gets done. Unlike, and I published a paper with Mike Carrier that kind of goes over some of these dichotomies. Unlike big tech, pharma has 100% on their product. And the moment they license that technology, they lose, right? So they're not in the business of licensing their technology. They're in the business of using patents to prevent competition from coming onto the market. Okay, so there are two kind of main strategies that we talk about. One is patent thickets, and one is evergreening. And Robin Feldman actually, I think, had a good kind of analogy to this. Evergreening is about making the fence longer, right? I use patents to kind of extend my market exclusivity by adding more patents that have later expiration dates. Patent thickets don't always extend the market period, but it's extending the thickness of the wall, right? So even though I may have one patent that expires in 20 years, that's very different from having 10 patents that expire at the same time, right? It makes it more difficult for me to enter. If I see, you know, like Humira and Humira is the poster child for kind of bad behavior. It has like, I think 120 some odd patents, 230 patents in the hopper. Like if I'm a biosimilar company, maybe I go, it's not, you know, it's not worth it for me to invest in this because I'm going to be in litigation for forever. That's actually what happened, right? Like in Europe, they got Humira biosimilars 2 or 3 years earlier than the US. In Europe, they have like, I think 30 patents that cover Humira. Here in the US, we had like 120, 130 patents that kind of cover the same product. And the question is like, why is that? And do they really need that many patents to kind of recoup their costs and protect their innovation? Okay, so evergreening, again, this is a direct way that you can extend exclusive rights. You have new patents that have new expiration dates that go beyond the previous patents. Patent thickets are the same patent on the same product. Many of these things are based on continuation patents. And there's a lot of stuff about terminal disclaimers, which we'll talk about probably when we go into the solutions section. And they've been kind of the target of a lot of legislative efforts, as well as the US PTO kind of rulemaking that has garnered a lot of comments. So many times these patents have the same expiration date, but this doesn't mean that they don't have an impact on market competition. And these rights are meaningful. These patent rights are meaningful. You asked me kind of what specific strategies they use to protect these things. Well, you know, like one of them was done by Allergen, who they tried to transfer their rights to the St. Regis Mohawk, a Native American tribe. Why? Because they wanted to protect their patents with a sovereign immunity argument. That doesn't pass the laugh test. But we had to litigate this to kind of get to where we were. Why did they do that? Why were they willing to transfer their rights to an Indian tribe? Because these patents matter, right? And the less chances I have for people to challenge them, and the more chances I have to enforce them, it will extend the life of my monopoly. And you know, Humira made $21 billion $21 billion, which is like as much as all of McDonald's made, right, on that one drug. And AbbVie has 42 other drugs that they make. That's $57 million a day. If I delay it a week, that's hundreds of millions of dollars, right? If I delay it a month, that's billions of dollars. And so there's all sorts of incentives to use this kind of patent thicket. evergreening strategy to extend exclusive rights.
And Wayne or Tahir, was there anything you wanted to add on to what Sean just explained?
I know. I think Sean's captured that very well. I mean, the thing is, for me, is that as I said in my opening statement, the idea of secondary patenting really, I feel, kind of grew around the Hatch-Waxman Act. It became a strategy when basically, that there were some benefits to the Hatch-Waxman Act when basically generics didn't have to replicate the clinical trials, but then there was all this thing around patents that was inserted and this connection to the marketing approval. So you had this merger of a patent system with the FDA system, and these patents were going to basically decide when a generic could come to the market. And when you think about it, it's easier to look back retrospectively and say, well, how come we didn't see this coming? But of course, I mean, it's when you look at it now, the industry, so, well, we're going to get our patents challenged because that was the bounty that was being offered through the Hatch-Waxman system. So what do we do to make it harder to challenge our patents? We're going to stack it up. And you can see it actually in the growth of patenting in the pharmaceutical sector. It's almost doubled since 1990. And it always brings me back to this figure, which it took 150 years in the US for the first 5 million patents to be granted, and it took another 30 years to get the next 6 million. And I always ask the question, have we become more inventive in the last sort of 30 years? I don't think so. I just think we've got lawyers now who know how to game the system and have actually basically found the loopholes. And so secondary patenting has really emerged as a phenomena in the last sort of 40 years. And that's a reflection of the policies. It's a reflection of the weakening of the courts, the CAFC. It's a reflection of this financialized model where, in some ways, if I was to show even an ounce of sympathy for the CEOs, they have to kind of meet their bottom lines. They have to keep growing, turning revenue over and over, and to make sure that they're growing. And that is a race to the bottom. And who's paying the price? The patients are. And so we really have to look much deeper than just even the patent system. It's the economic theories and policies that are driving this. And, all in this idea that we're getting growth and progress. Well, actually, I only see a few people benefiting here, when basically a company can rope in 21 billion on one drug. I don't see that as a community benefit.
Well, it definitely seems like a price to consumers. Continuing, go ahead.
Yeah, the only thing I would add, and I think it sort of follows on what Tahir was saying, is the link between innovations and patents is not absolute. Counting patents doesn't mean you're counting innovation. And a lot of times, especially when you get into this world of secondary patents, you may not see the innovation that's out there. I mean, the pharmaceutical companies say they're spending 83 billion a year on research and development, but how much of that is in drug discovery versus defensive patenting? So you really have to be careful when you're looking at patents. And we do like the notion that, yes, a patent can provide an inventor the opportunity to go out there and do something new. But at the same time, just because you have a patent doesn't mean that society's better off or we're more innovative than we were. In fact, there's a lot of innovation that goes on outside the patent system. So just getting away from this notion that counting patents means we're counting invention is important, I think.
Well, and I assume since we're talking about things like Humira that have, what was it, hundreds of patents, Sean, that we wouldn't say that's hundreds of innovations per se when the result is the creation of a single drug.
So we actually use Humira as a kind of a test subject. Who is it? Rachel Good and Bernard Chow had actually gone through and classified all of Humira's patents and looked at the actual portfolio and how many of them kind of stem from each other. Out of those 120, 130 patents, only 8 of them, they all stem from 8 families. So you really could have reduced it down to probably 8, right? And even those 8, one of them is a method of using Humira to, for the indication that it kind of is used for. So even those, and I would note, in Japan, I think there are like a total of 4 patents that they got for the same family. And guess what? They got generics 3 years earlier than we did.
Mm-hmm. Well, and while I've got you, Sean, I know we had a question come up in the chat that you already typed out an answer to, but I just wanted to give you a chance if you wanted to kind of share that with the rest of the group. The question was, Professor Tu, you mentioned Hatch-Waxman. What do you think that both the patent system and market exclusivity system should be updated to improve competition?
Yeah, I mean, Hatch-Waxman is a delicate balance between, and it took many years to get Hatch-Waxman passed. And the reason why I think it was kind of a compromise between brand firms and generic firms to kind of have patents kind of get that market exclusivity, as well as patents to kind of help recoup costs, but allow generics on the field as early as possible so that we can get access and lower prices faster, right? Again, as Tahir had pointed out, that system it hasn't been changed all that much in 40 years. And the question is, do we need to kind of update it now so that it reflects all of the loopholes and all of the gamesmanship that has been going on? As Wayne had mentioned, none of what they're doing is illegal, really. And the question is like, but they found ways to kind of, again, use the patent system in a way that I don't think it was designed to be used. And it's created some problems.
Yeah,
I would just add there, Ken, it's interesting when you go back to some of the discussions that were happening around Hatch-Waxman, and the pharmaceutical industry at the time were going spare, saying that this is going to actually kill innovation, to use that term. This is back in 19. And now, when you're actually saying we need to reform Hatch-Waxman, they're saying, oh, it's going to kill innovation. 40 years on, it's the same argument. It's like now they know how, they figured it out. They know how to work it. They know how to game it. They don't want anyone to touch it. 40 years ago, when there was this shift which was probably one of the most seismic shifts in both intellectual property and pharmaceuticals, they said it was going to kill innovation then. So which one is it? I mean, and this is a common theme throughout all the conversations when we're talking about patent tickets, and back to Dr. Brau's point about patent counting. When we show, for example, in some of our studies, and I know we'll get this maybe down into this a little bit more, when we show on average there are 74 granted patents on some of the top 10 selling drugs in the United States, you get the USPTO coming out with a report saying, oh, well, actually, sometimes the numbers of patents don't really matter in terms of when a generic or biosimilar enters the market. Yet it's the same agency that goes around the world telling, actually, we need to count patents to show how innovative we are. So which one is it? Do they matter or don't they matter? And actually, the way I see it is where they should be counting them, they don't. And where they shouldn't be counting them, which is when they're trying to show the measure of innovation, they shouldn't be counting them there. So they've got their methodologies all back to front.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense, and we see that same kind of fact pattern, I think, in a lot of industries where initially people, organizations will oppose new regulations, but once they figure out how to game those regulations, they become their biggest advocates, which is something that we at our street, I think, fight against a lot. So I appreciate that. And to hear, just following up on that, pulling on that thread a little bit more. I know your organization, IMAC. Is it IMAC or IMAKE? I apologize.
No, it's IMAC.
IMAC, all right, I got it right. I know you've done studies that identify the extent of patent thickets, and I think that's kind of what you were alluding to before, especially on popular drugs. We've already talked about some Humira. I don't know if you have some other examples, but if so, could you provide some examples and discuss how you evaluate the scope of patent thickets, and how do your results compare to to others that examine patent thickets?
Yeah, it's a great question. So there's a lot of conversation around this. We've received a lot of criticism. We've even had letters from senators, and many in the pro-IP community are sort of very determined to throw all kinds of mud at us for coming up with these larger numbers. And what they would like to look at is the Orange Book. Well, anybody, I mean, it's even on the actual FDA's own site. They say you can't just trust the Orange Book patents to know what the universe of patents is on a drug. They say it clearly. It's actually listed. It's actually said there. So, for example, that's one difference. What we do is when we investigate the patents around a drug, we look at, if I'm a generic or biosimilar company, and I do this from a practice point of view, that's what I said, that's why I mentioned my days of practice, we look at it as like, what would a generic and biosimilar have to navigate in terms of deciding whether they want to enter the market? They are having to look at patents that are, if we're just looking at small molecule drugs, which are listed on the Orange Book, they're looking at way more patents than what is actually listed on the Orange Book, because they need to know what's in the pipeline, what's actually potentially a blocking. They also need to say, well, if I'm developing a generic version, I need to avoid this, this, and this. These are all landmines. Some of them are basically not all listed on the Orange Book, but they are ones that they have to avoid, because it doesn't mean just because it's not listed on the Orange Book, you can't assert it. Of course you can. And so there are actually examples where patents are being asserted that are not listed on the Orange Book. I mean, Revlimid's an example. It's a cancer drug of which there are a number of patents that are listed on the Orange Book, but there's some that have been asserted on crystalline polymorph forms of the drug that were asserted that were not on the Orange Book. And similarly, when we talk about biologics, I mean, we don't really even have a system of listing, because it's this kind of sort of ad hoc purple book. When litigation starts, now the branded company has to provide the patents to the FDA to provide on this kind of half-baked purple book. But the problem with that system is that when you've got with the biologic sector, the problem's even worse, because they have so many patents, they can pick and choose what they're going to use in litigation. So they may use a set of patents against one particular biosimilar entrants, and then use a whole different bunch against, depending on what they use, because biologics, the nature, things that have there's so many processes that they patent. It's very hard to get a different process. And so basically, the way we look at it is it's a freedom to operate analysis. But the folk who want to criticize our data, they want to say, well, how come you've got an inordinate number of different patents in terms of what's listed on the Orange Book? Well, because we're looking at it from a practitioner's point of view. And the thing is what's also important is, and this is a debate that actually I think we need to really bring more light to, is people and legislative solutions are all focused on, well, how many patents were asserted at litigation? Any practitioner worth their skin will tell you there's a big game going on way before you even get to litigation. There's all these patents that you're having to navigate that we're not even seeing. Even before you go to trial, before you actually decide on what are the set patents that are going to actually go into the actual trial, they're having to negotiate which patents are going to be left behind. The judge is saying, no, you can't, you've got to remove those. You go, these are all a problem. Nobody's talking about that. And the industry and their advocates and their sort of their minions, they don't want you to even talk about that part of the puzzle. That's a whole big dark landscape that we are not even talking about, that we need to address. And until we start addressing that, we are never going to resolve this problem. And I think that's one of the biggest flaws in the way we're doing policymaking at the moment, is we are not using a practitioner's lens on this. And I've spoken to a number of biosimilar companies and generic companies, and the first thing they say is, we look at the patent applications. And yet we are being criticized for looking at patent applications as part of the process of the cohort of our patents. You have to. You're not a lawyer worth your salt if you're not. In fact, you're negligent. So it befuddles me that you have these experts out there, quote unquote, who probably have never sat in a law office and actually practiced, trying to tell people what the policy should be and how these are all inflated. It's kind of worrying.
Sure. Yep. Go ahead, Tom.
I'll add a little bit of color to that. So, like even the patents that are listed on the Orange Book, I'll have a paper coming out soon in JAMA that looks at all of the patents on the Orange Book and how many of them have terminal disclaimers that are in response to obviousness type double patenting. If you get that type of rejection, you pretty much have an identical specification, in which case you're not disclosing anything new, right? In fact, by definition, a continuation patent cannot disclose anything new. So, patents are a quid pro quo. You give me something innovative, you tell me how to make and use the thing, and we give you limited exclusivity, right? Limited by time and your claims. And these patents are not innovative. Why? Because you've already disclosed, what it is that you've said, you've given a terminal disclaimer. And when you do that kind of analysis, about 35% of those patents have a terminal disclaimer in response to a obviousness type double patenting rejection. That's huge, right? Like almost half of these patents are not, they don't disclose anything new. And then the question is like, well, why do they need this kind of stuff anyways? Like, we're not gaining anything as society, right? They're not disclosing anything new. Why is it that we're giving them more?
I appreciate that. Wayne, anything you wanted to add on that
Yeah,
topic?
I would just add that, on looking at when you do end up with these crazy patents, you're not disclosing anything. You don't really see any innovation, but there are other costs on the innovative process that this sort of invokes and deters real invention, I think. And first you have the sort of the direct defensive patenting that you see these brand name companies do, and for reasons that Sean mentioned, these are profit maximizing firms, and you can't really blame them. They've found a system that works, and they're going to squeeze every dime they can out of it. So you would expect this kind of behavior. So institutionally, if something's wrong, it's in the institutions. So, and currently the institutions sort of let them do this defensive patenting as maybe a priority in some instances that's more beneficial than going out on a high risk discovery investment. And at the same time, when you do talk about generics trying to get into the market, they have so many more costs in terms of being able to compete or even get into that market. So not only do you have to sort of look at the resources diverted away from frontier investments in new drugs to propping up existing profitable drugs, and then also how much are these generic firms diverting from their ability to be effectively serving consumers in terms of the legal costs, the transaction costs of them being able to get in the market in the first place. And the more of these secondary patents you have, the bigger problem that is.
Not only that, their profit margins are pretty razor thin, right? Like one of these generic companies, just take a step back. Generic firms and generic drugs account for about 90% of the prescriptions here in the US. And they are a fraction, like dimes on the dollar compared to brand firms. And it's almost too cheap for us in that we're losing competitors because they're barely able to make a profit sometimes. And so I kind of feel for these generics in a way.
Yeah, that makes sense.
That's just to say, like, competition works in the US. It works well. It almost works too well sometimes because you get so much competition that you eliminate competition, and then we're in a situation where we're in a duopoly again or something like that.
Sean, while I've got you, I was wondering if you could also talk a little bit about the concept of product hopping. Its impact on patient access to more affordable medications, and how has the practice of evergreening evolved beyond simple chemical modifications to include patenting delivery devices and other peripherals? What implications does this have for generic competition?
Okay, yeah. So product hopping is basically moving from one version of a product to another that's one that's not patent protected or patent expired to one that is patent protected. And of course, if it's not patent protected, I can't charge a lot for it because I got a lot of competition. And then if I move to a patented one, then I can charge higher rents. Albuterol is a great example. And I published a paper with Will Feldman at the New England Journal of Medicine on exactly this product. Albuterol has been around since the 80s, right? And there's a switch from CFC, chlorofluorocarbons, to HFA. Why? Because we wanted to be friendlier to the environment. But that switch from unpatented CFC, the albuterol was selling for about $15 per inhaler. And then they switched it from CFC to HFA, which was patent protected. And guess what? The prices went up to about $200 per inhaler, right? This cost the American people about $4 billion. And what does that equate to? If people would not drive for 2 days or not use their air conditioners for 2 days, that would have been the equal amount of CFCs that we would have saved. And so the question is, was that really worth $2 billion or $2.6 billion worth of extra costs? And what's really a problem is when they pull their old products. So we can't use those old products anymore, and it makes it harder for generics to even get on the market. For biosimilars, for example, they have to buy these older versions so that they can make these biosimilar versions, because I have to compare my product versus your product. Well, if you pull it from the market, I can't use those products. I can't buy the products. So I can't make my biosimilar, right? Will Feldman at Portal at Harvard Medical School has done some great work showing how these device patents are used to extend market exclusivity. Devices are particularly complex because the FDA approves them as device drug combination. So you really not only have to have the same drug, but you have to have the same delivery mechanism. So it could be really difficult to make new devices or generic devices when the new device is protected and you move from that old device to the new device. I have to use your new device, which if it's approved, like that's a kind of a product hop. And, these devices do actually add some benefit, right? So for example, like the inhaler has a dosage counter. I want to know how many doses I've taken or if I missed a dose. Like that's innovation, right? But should I be paying like the value of the drug for a dosage counter? That seems a little bit silly for me, right? Like why, if your iPhone has a better camera, shouldn't I be able to buy the old iPhone that has a crappier camera and pay less for it? Like we're forced to buy these new devices because of the way these things are regulated. You asked about kind of evergreening strategies. Many, like a lot, and Tahir had mentioned the polymorph patents. We see a real increase in the use of both enantiomer forms and polymorph forms of these drugs. These are really difficult patents to get around. Why? It's not an indication, which I can carve out of the label. It's not a manufacturing technique, which I can design around. This is the product itself. Like I have to make the product or else, and by definition, a generic is the same product, right? So if you have a patent on the product, I'm screwed. I have to like either settle with you or like, and is it really innovative to have like a crystal form of a drug that, I would, if it actually added some patient benefit, that's one thing. But somebody has done a study on enantiomers and like 85% of all enantiomers don't do anything, right? And so why is it that we're paying all of these extra costs and extending the monopoly for a form of the drug that actually doesn't give you patient benefit?
May I just add to, I mean, I'm glad that Sean just raised that point about polymorphs, for example. I mean, polymorphs are sort of one of the great examples of how something in science, and I've spent a lot of time because we've also challenged patents in in sort of at the IPR level and in many other forums. Polymorphs, something that have been around in terms of a technique for at least over 50, 60 years. And now we get to a point where they're done through sort of high throughput screening. You basically have a system which can actually screen all the various crystal forms of this compound. So even just from that perspective, what's inventive about it? These things are inherent in the original compound that you've patented. Secondly, if you look at the FDA regulations on this, and I spoke about this at the, there was a joint sort of listening session between the FDA and PTO of how they could actually better collaborate. And I think we might get to that a little bit later in this conversation. And the FDA has a guideline, it's like a sort of decision tree of what drug makers have to do when they find a crystalline form. They have to test for all the crystalline forms. These are routine testing that they have to do. And yet, on the one hand, they're going to the FDA and doing, they have to follow these routine tests that they have to do because they know they're inherent, they're there, they have to test for them because they don't want them seeding out into some other form that will actually reduce the stability of the drug. But yet, on the other hand, they're walking across the road to the patent office saying, we found something inventive. It's absurd. This is routine science. It's routine experimentation that we are granting patents for. And if we take a drug like Revlimid, which basically the base patent expired in 2019, it was because of two polymorph patents that has allowed Celgene, or BMS as it is now, to hold on to the market until 2026. Now, they have given some settlements to a couple of companies, but these are limited volume distributed generics, which basically are staggered over the next 5 years that they can increase their volume, but it's not real competition. So they've used these polymorph patents to maintain, potential revenue of about 40-50 billion dollars that we are paying extra for. That's just one example of what's happening in the patent system. And this is happening across a lot of different drugs. These types of what I actually would call, if I'm being strict, these are innovations. They're not inventive. And I think this is the discernment we have to make between what is inventive because what is innovative. And I will take it a step further. There's a great piece, and I recommend anyone read it. It's called What's Invention Got to Do? It's by Justice Hugh Laddie, who was a UK High Court judge. He wrote this seminal piece. And his argument is he believes in the patent system. But he argues, he says, most things in science are obvious, but we need the patent system to drive investment. And that leads to a kind of a different question. If that is the case, then we don't really have an inventive system or an innovation system, if you want to call it. We have an investment system. That is what we're driving here. And that is an entirely different conversation that's going on, if you want to use that particular viewpoint.
I had a follow-up, but Wayne, did you want to add something to that first?
Yeah, I was just going to add onto that because it does sort of look at the fundamental structure of the pharmaceutical industry. And I think what Tahir is getting at is important because it shows that there's sort of a life cycle management strategy that goes on in the industry. Obviously, they say they spend $83 billion a year in R&D, and then they have, ideally they're in search of the next blockbuster that's going to be their $4 billion drug, and all of their incentives are to make that drug and run it as far as they can until they hit what is called a patent cliff, where generics come in and prices can go down by as much as 80%. But it does set up a series of incentives to basically encourage product hopping, encourage evergreening, because you have this life cycle and you're going to squeeze every penny you can out of that life cycle. So you do see, and there's evidence of these companies and how they go out there and actually use their investments and use their resources to defend what they have as just as much as perhaps looking for new discoveries. I mean, there's one study that was out there that looked at when a firm acquires another firm, what happens to the drugs that are in their development pipeline. And if they're competing drugs, chances are they're not going to finish the discovery process. And that holds true even stronger depending on how long of a patent life or exclusivity is left on their own patent before they have to worry about competition. So these processes are out there. There's every incentive in the current system to engage in those processes. And you'd probably, if you're a corporation, you're probably not serving your shareholders well if you're not doing that. It does get back to this bigger question. If they're just responding to the system, then how do you fix the system so some more of those resources get pushed to the competitive side of the equation quicker, so we have competition and we have patients with the ability to get more beneficial and low-cost drugs at a quicker pace.
Are you telling me, Wayne, that pharmaceutical companies may intentionally drag out the process of developing drugs to make sure that they can squeeze all of the money they can out of the existing drugs that they have?
It's portfolio management, it's called.
Yeah, obviously not something that we want to see. And I want to tie in an audience question that we had, because I think it relates to this broader question. And then I do want to make sure that we get to some of the solution-oriented stuff before we run out of time, even though I think we could probably talk about the problems all day long. So one of our attendees asked, how can you tell the difference between a patent thicket and a legitimate patent for an improvement on a drug, such as a small reformulation that might help a rare disease patient take the drug? And that's open to anybody, but I don't know if Tahir or Sean, you want to jump in?
That's a tough nut to crack, right? Like, you'd have to really look closely at the claims. And I mean, the problem is you'd have to not only look at the claims, but you have to understand the disease, right? So, for example, if I say, taking a drug, I have a drug that you take twice a day versus once a day. maybe I say, hey, that's not really innovative, but then I find out, oh, it's a sleeping drug, right? And if I have to wake up in the middle of the night to take the drug, that's a real disadvantage, right? But so, like, I think it's a difficult nut to crack. With that said, one kind of rule of thumb that you can do is look at what type of patent it is in terms of, is it a continuation? Is it divisional? Is it a continuation in part? Is it an original patent? Like, and what you do when you look at continuations versus originals is the disclosure the same? If the disclosure is the same, then it by definition can't be innovative, right? Because you haven't told me anything new. So that would be one way to kind of target some of these non-innovative drugs. That's a rule of thumb. I think it's hard, right? Because you do have to do that kind of analysis. And some of these things, are, again, like the dosage counter on an inhaler, that provides value, right? But is it something that we want to, pay the entire price of the drug for? Like, we should pay the value of what that innovation is. And if I want to pay $5 extra for a dosage counter, that's fine. But I shouldn't have to pay $100 extra for that innovation.
I would just add to what Sean said. I think, there's maybe the first time it's done, there is that inventive activity around it. But once it's been done and then you reapply it, there's got to be, it's what I've started to call, there's this, we have, one of the criteria for getting a patent is it has to be novel, has to be non-obvious. I think we're living in a patent system that has perpetual novelty, that these things are done over and over again. And I know science is not exact. It doesn't always work with different things, but they're obvious to try. And so we're living in this perpetual novelty where the same things we do, polymorphs is a great example, crystalline forms. We just keep doing it and we keep rewarding it and we keep saying. Now, that's not to say that we don't want these little modifications and improvements that might benefit the patient, the sleeping patient, or the rare disease thing. But I think that's where, if we're really talking about free market principles, that's where you let the market decide. You advertise it, you promote it, and the market takes care of it. You may only get 2-3 years of lead time before the next version comes out. But that's it, because you're not really inventing anything. But what we've done is we've shoved the patent system as an incentive into everything, because it's a one size fits all. And this is why we have a monopoly problem. This is why we have a patent ticket problem. And I think we really have to extricate ourselves from this kind of thinking to say that we're not going to get these valuable utilitarian modifications, but they're not invented. Otherwise, what we're doing is we're living a lie. We're just saying, you know what, this is progress, but we're not. Yes, somebody gets the value of it as a patient. That's no denying that. But at some point, we've got to kind of put a sort of, a period there and say, okay, when does it stop? Otherwise, we're just living in this perpetual novelty of just incentivizing the same thing.
But I think that transitions us well into the solutions-oriented portion of this. And I really appreciate Clayton sending in this question that I think helps kind of tackles a little bit of the problems as well as kind of starts our solution discussion. He asked, can you speak to the role that the lack of FDA USPTO coordination plays in artificially extending periods of market exclusivity? Any thoughts on the legislation introduced by Hassan and Braun, Kuster and Harshbarger to require manufacturers to make consistent statements to each agency? I'm not sure if anybody has a particular desire to jump in on that, but also just wanting to kick off the discussion on reforms that we could make with the US PTO more broadly, and US Patent and Trademark Office.
Yeah, I would just probably jump in quickly because I've been thinking about this whole collaborative aspect of the USPTO and FDA. I think there definitely needs to be a bridge built between these two agencies so that they're speaking to each other more. For those of us who follow these conversations, the statements that are made at the FDA, the polymorph example is a great example where you say you do one thing at the FDA and you do another thing at the PTO. I think bridging that gap is important. I know there's various other bills out there. I think one of them is actually Senator Tillis, where they're going to do an investigation and come up with a report that will basically say how can these agencies work better together to improve system. I think we have a deeper problem. If you've got two agencies that are pretty much, and this is maybe a controversial statement, but I'm going to say it, that are pretty much regulatorily captured, putting them together is not going to change the problem. They have a culture to act the way they act. Getting them to work together is not going to change it. They're going to do what they do. They're just going to do it together. So I hope I'm wrong, but I think we have to ask more fundamental questions of ourselves. Of what are we trying to change here? Are we just saying, are we just putting some gloss on this and saying, oh, the FDA and the PTO all of a sudden are going to change their entire behavior because they're working together? No, I can put my mortgage on that. So that's the question I would like to ask is, what are these solutions getting to? Yes, they might get us somewhere down the road in terms of getting more disclosure, more transparency. That's important. But I don't think it's going to solve the problem. There is a cultural problem in these agencies because the clients they serve are the corporations. And it's something that we've advocated for. There needs to be a greater public voice in how these agencies are run.
Wayne, Sean, anything you'd like to add there?
Yeah, I think Tahir is absolutely right. There is, if you take that 30,000-foot view, you have to look institutionally on how to make things better. Having people work together doesn't necessarily mean you're going to get a different outcome. And there are things that I think could be better done. The FDA adds its own exclusivities on top of the patent, and sometimes the patent owners suddenly figure out how to use that exclusivity in a way that even generates further barriers to competition from others. The orphan drug, a lot of people, since you get 7 more years or whatever, they're jumping onto that and getting that indications that say this feeds that population, but then they're using it elsewhere, but that exclusivity in one spot keeps them keeps the generics from competing elsewhere with them. So it is an issue. And I think, I guess when we get into our discussion of change, but I think there's things that have to happen, at the USPTO. Look at how they look at drugs, how examiners do their work. If they did their job better and every patent was a golden patent, we wouldn't have the problems that we're having today. The obvious and the non-novel things wouldn't be in the system to start with. So I think, Tahir's right. We need to think of this, take a step back and look at the whole system and look how competition works, how we get the innovation, how the generics eventually get into the market. But all of that doesn't necessarily change by having better coordination between agencies.
So I would add a little bit to that. The problem to me is not so much industry capture as much as it's our incentive structure for patent examiners. All right, so here we're getting into the weeds a little bit. So the way patent examiners in the US are graded is through what is called a count system. And that structure incentivizes not patent quality, but patent quantity. All right, it kind of reminds me of what, I don't remember which PTO director said it, but he said, we're not the rejection office, we're the patent office, right? And so, they want to have patents out there. This is not how Europe does it, by the way. They're not graded on quantity, and they're given a lot more time to kind of review patents, and they take their like, I understand when we say, hey, you're going to get fired if you don't produce this many number of counts. Guess what? You're going to produce more counts, which means that I love continuation patents because I can get lots of counts very quickly because I don't have to do any extra examination because it's the same specification, right? Just different claims. So I think we need to have a kind of a come to Jesus moment and kind of think about what it is that we're trying to incentivize when it comes to this count system, because we're not getting quality patents for sure. We're getting a lot of patents, but we're not really getting the type of patents that we want, the truly innovative, inventive patents. So I would say, like change the count structure, but that is a really tough thing to do too, in large part because the patent examiner union is very strong, and they like, there's some advantages of having a count system that is on quantity, right? It's easy to measure, but maybe not the best for our system.
Now, are there any other reforms at the USPTO that people would like to flag in terms of ways that we can make it work better?
So I love the rulemaking that they have set out on terminal disclaimers and obviousness type double patenting rejections. Why? Because a lot of the other bills are ex post kind of solutions, in that they've already created the thicket and we're just trying to limit the number of patents that you can bring in litigation. Well, I don't know that number until I actually litigate. Like, the nice thing about the USPTO rulemaking is that we stop the thickets from ever being created in the first place, right? And we target those patents that are the least innovative, that don't disclose anything new. And we get back to our basic principle of, like, you show us something new and useful and how to make and use the thing, and then we give you some amount of limited market exclusivity. So I like the way that they've kind of gone about targeting the worst type of patents. And like I said, about 30–40% of the Orange Book patents, and Mark Lemley and Lisa Ouellette have done another study that is going to come out, and it shows overall about 50% of the patents have terminal disclaimers. So a lot of this stuff is just, it's not disclosing anything new. And those are the ones that you want to kind of get rid of. That goes to kind of what Tahir had said about the last 6 million patents coming in the last few decades.
And I agree with Sean. I think the USPTO proposed rule on terminal disclaimers is one of the more positive aspects of trying to really cull some of these patent thickets. However, I would probably say that I think the terminal disclaimer rule is a relic, and it should be just done away with. We don't have these systems anywhere else in the world, as far as I'm aware, and they're doing pretty okay. I think it's a system that maybe existed because of before the US system used to operate on a first to invent and all these other aspects of it, and I believe we don't need it anymore. Then also back to the examine account thing, it's also a revenue earner for the PTO, these terminal disclaimers. And you have to ask the question again, this cultural thing of well, what should whether this is a Congress's problem of expecting, the USPTO to drive its own revenue and earnings and what have you. There's a lot of things in there that I'm not going to sort of get into. But the thing is, though, if that is a revenue model, but it's creating all this pollution, then we really need to relook at that and say, well, actually, we don't need this. Or the USPTO needs to be subsidized in other ways, not through these kinds of these system that basically only encourages actors to behave the way they do. So I think terminal disclaimers should be ended. But I think it's a good step that the USPTO has taken.
Wayne, anything you'd like to add? Reforms you'd like to see at the USPTO?
No, I think that's probably the most exciting thing they're working on right now. And I think it does have a very far-reaching effect on and it's not just in the pharmaceutical world. It's across all industries. But again, it gets down to how does the system work right now? And I know we're running out of time, so but I think we need to have Congress focusing on ways to look at these secondary patents to clean up some of the messes that are out there, but also have the USPTO out there looking at ways, even beyond the terminal disclaimer rulemaking, how to get the quality of the patents that come out of the system to be better patents. And then if there's problems, how do you get the bad patents out in an efficient manner? So those are the things I would focus.
I would push back on that because I have some empirical evidence that shows otherwise. So in that, it doesn't affect all industries. It affects pretty much 3 industries. Digital transmission of data, that's CPC code G06. The second one is pharmaceuticals, A61, and the third one is semiconductors. these terminally displaying patents come from those 3 main CPC codes, and it's like 60% of all patents come from those 3 CPC codes. So it's not going to affect tons of industries. It's going to affect those industries disproportionately. And like I said before, high tech uses these patents in a very different way. Like, it's weird to say, hey, competitor, you give me your 1 patent and I'll give you my 100 patents, right? No, I say you give me your 100 patents and I give you my 100 patents, even though they're all garbage and only really 1 or 2 is irrelevant, right? But at the end of the day, we get to where I can compete and everybody wins because we cross-license each other. Not so with pharma, right? Where I say, here are my 100 patents, and you're going to have to kind of invalidate them all before you can get on the market, because all I need is 1 to stop you from getting onto the market. And that's a very different calculus, right? When we talk about that and how they use patents. In addition, it doesn't actually affect small businesses that much. They're not the ones who are filing these continuation patents. So for people to say, oh, it's going to disproportionately affect small businesses, well, they're not filing. That small businesses aren't playing these games. I think small businesses are actually going to be put at an advantage not having to deal with these thickets to get onto the market.
Well, I see that we are at the top of the hour, but I hate to shut down this conversation because it's going very well. I do want to just kind of, because probably my fault I didn't pace this as well as I could have, wanted to give at least one more opportunity for everyone to touch on any potential solutions. We talked a little bit about USPTO reforms. Are there any other solutions that you all have seen or would like to see from Congress? And I know specifically that there's some interest in how to address the issue of evergreening. But yeah, we'll have to keep it brief because I know we do want to let our folks go in a timely manner.
I would,
Samir, please.
Yeah, very quickly. I think a lot of the solutions we're seeing are very much downstream, if you want to use that analogy, that they're not getting to the root of the problem. I think we really need to get to the root, and that means, I think, overall, really changing the standard for what it means to get a patent, or what we describe as an invention. We've put out a blueprint which really gets to some aspects of those. I'm not saying it's exhaustive, but I think we have a blueprint that addresses patent thickets, which really gets to some of the practices that we see that corporations, pharmaceutical industry is using to kind of game the system. So I would say we need to go way upstream to stop the dead bodies coming downstream.
Thanks, sir. Dwayne, anything else that you wanted to add?
No, just very, very briefly, I think Trina's right. We really want to get to the core of the issue, and I think Congress is dealing with some of the issues that secondary patents create. But at the same time, I think if you look at just sort of take a special interest view of Congress, and maybe I'm being a little bit cynical, but the patent holders tend to have a stronger voice in the debates that are going on in Congress. So it's going to be a tougher battle to get Congress to do anything that's going to sort of challenge what the patent holders are doing. So it'd be nice to go up, as Terry said, go further upstream and go study those problems and fix the system at the patent office versus what Congress is doing.
Yeah,
I would just quickly say that I think, though, we have moved the needle quite a bit in the last 6-7 years that we've all been working on this. So I think that's a positive.
And Sean, anything that you'd like to add in terms of solutions?
Yeah, I could give you a blow up the world kind of solution, which is, at some point in time, maybe we do away with patents, maybe we do away with market exclusivities, and we just say, hey, if you make a drug, we're going to give you 10 years of exclusivity where nobody else can be on the market, but that's it. Like, I don't care about your patents. I don't care about, whatever thing. We think that 10 years is enough for you to charge whatever you want to charge and make way more money than recouping your costs. But then enough is enough, And at that point in time, let market competition come in and let's stop playing patent games. Let's stop playing market exclusivity games. But we just want, let's set a time and make that it, right? And then a lot, if we did that, it's an easy rule, right? I don't have to apply anything. I just say you get 10 years, make as much money as you can, right? And then know that after that time, competitors are going to come in. And that's an easy rule to kind of get at. And then the real question then is like, what time period is it going to be? Is it going to be 5 years? Is it going to be 10 years? Is it going to be 12 years? That's an answerable question, right? We can figure out how much it costs on average to make drugs, get through the approval process, make a handsome profit, and then let the market do its thing, right? Let competition drive prices down and bring access to everyone.
No, I love that. I think that's a perfect closing sentiment. Reduce prices and bring access to everyone. And I can tell you that the R Street Institute is going to continue this fight as difficult as it is, as Wayne pointed out, that often the advocates for patents seem to have stronger voices often, especially in the halls of Congress. And as all of our panelists pointed out, that we've kind of arrived at this regulatory capture system where pharmaceutical companies that maybe once said, no, don't do that, are now saying, actually, we really like this because it enables us, to control the market in a way that we actually really like. So I think that's a great place to end our discussion. Thank you all so much for joining us. Thank you to all of our participants for joining us to listen to this discussion. I hope that you found it helpful. I really appreciate the number of questions that we got, and I do apologize to the couple of questions we weren't able to get to in the time allotted. But what that tells me is that this is a very interesting and dynamic conversation, and that we need to keep having it because there's obviously a lot more that we need to discuss. So thank you all for your time. Thank you to Tahir and Sean especially for joining us, as well as Wayne. And with that, please check out the resources that were shared in the links or in the chat, as well as the Q&A section. And you can also find more information about our work on this topic at rstreet.org. With that, I'll sign off. Say thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks for having us. Thanks.